My parents are furious I didn't consult them about buying my house, because they planned that my sister, her husband, and their 3 kids would move in with me. So I said no and cut all ties with them. The notification light on my phone blinked at 11:51 p.m. It was the only light in my cabin, a sharp beacon of intrusion cutting through the deep Colorado silence. The message was from my mother, Holly. It didn't say hello. It didn't ask if I was awake. It read, quote, "Code isn't working. Alexis is freezing. Open the gate." End quote. I didn't get up. I didn't panic. I simply opened the security app on my tablet with a swipe of my finger. The grainy night vision feed showed my sister shivering by the keypad at the bottom of my driveway. But she wasn't alone. Idling behind her, spewing gray exhaust into the pristine mountain air was a 26-foot U-Haul moving truck. They hadn't come to visit. They had come to conquer. Before we see how Julia handles this invasion, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. I did not text back. I did not call to ask for an explanation. In my line of work as a data actuary, we are trained to look at variables and predict outcomes. The variable here was a 26-foot truck idling on my property at midnight. The outcome, if I opened that gate, was a permanent occupation. My parents and sister had not come for a holiday. They had come because they had burned their own lives to the ground and decided my sanctuary was their insurance policy. I watched the screen. My sister Alexis was stomping her boots in the snow, gesturing wildly at her husband Alexander, who was leaning against the truck, looking defeated. They were waiting for the gate to slide open. They were waiting for me to play my role. The beautiful, quiet sister, who absorbed the family's chaos so they didn't have to. With a tap, the camera feed vanished, replaced by my smart home administration panel. I scrolled down to the security tab. There was the guest code I had given my mother 2 years ago for emergencies. My finger hovered over the trash can icon. I didn't hesitate. I tapped delete, then I tapped confirm. The digital command flew through the fiber optic cables buried under the frozen ground, severing the only link they had to my warmth. On the monitor, I saw Alexis punch the code into the keypad again. Then she kicked the metal post. They were trapped. The private road to my cabin was 5 miles long, narrow, and icy. There was no cell service at the bottom of the valley. Only the intercom system connected to my house. The intercom buzzed. A shrill, demanding sound in my quiet living room. I walked over to the wall panel and turned the volume all the way down. Silence returned. I picked up my landline. This was the only way out for them, and I was about to dictate the terms. I dialed the local sheriff's department. I kept my voice calm, professional, and devoid of familial guilt. I told the dispatcher that there were trespassers blocking my private access road. I did not say my family. I did not say my mother. I said trespassers. In the eyes of the law, that is exactly what they were. For the next 20 minutes, I stood by the window, watching the red taillights of the truck bleed into the falling snow. My phone vibrated incessantly on the table, a frantic heartbeat I refused to acknowledge. I didn't block them yet. I needed the evidence of their escalation. When the blue and red strobe lights of the sheriff's cruiser cut through the darkness, I felt a wave of cold satisfaction. I watched on the monitor as the deputy stepped out. I saw my father Jeffrey climb out of the truck, waving his arms, pointing up toward my cabin. He was trying to explain, trying to charm, trying to use the authority he had wielded over me my entire life. But out here on the side of a mountain at midnight, his authority was a currency with no value. The deputy pointed down the road. "Leave now." I watched them climb back into their vehicles. The U-Haul began a clumsy, dangerous 3-point turn on the narrow track. As they drove away, disappearing around the bend, I didn't feel safe exactly. I felt efficient. I had identified a risk, and I had mitigated it. The sheriff's departure marked the end of the immediate crisis, but the silence that followed was heavy with unanswered questions. Why had I been so brutal? Why didn't I just talk to them? Why didn't I just give them a chance? I sat at my desk and opened a new spreadsheet. It wasn't for work. It was for my sanity. I titled it The Cost of Survival. Most people look at my life, my paid-off cabin, my savings account, my quiet evenings, and call it luck or privilege. Or maybe just selfishness. They see the result, but they don't see the invisible chain I forged. Link by painful link to pull myself out of the hole my family dug for me. Row 1. Date January 15th, 7 years ago. Expense: $45,000. Description: Alexis's credit card debt consolidation. I typed it out staring at the number. I was 22 then, fresh out of college, working 80-hour weeks as a junior analyst. I lived in a basement apartment with no windows to save on rent. Alexis was living in a loft downtown, posting photos of her abundant life while drowning in interest payments. My parents had called me crying. "She'll be ruined, Julia. She'll never get a job with that credit score. You have savings. Help her." So I did. I emptied my account. I bought her freedom with my labor. Row 2. Date March 10th, 5 years ago. Expense $12,000. Description: parents' emergency home repair. Turns out the emergency was a sunroom renovation they couldn't afford. They didn't ask. They just sent me the contractor's invoice. I paid it because that's what the good daughter does. I kept typing. The list grew longer. Bail money for Alexander's failed startup. The down payment on a car Alexis needed for her brand image. It wasn't just money. It was my life. Every dollar I gave them was an hour I spent staring at spreadsheets while my friends went out. Every check I wrote was a vacation. I didn't take a dress. I didn't buy a risk I didn't take. I stopped typing and looked out the window at the snow-covered pines. People call me cheap. They call me cold. They don't understand that for me money isn't currency, it's oxygen. In a family that viewed me as a utility, a battery to be drained until empty, my savings were the only thing that proved I existed for myself. My frugality wasn't a quirk. It was a survival mechanism. It was the only way I could buy back pieces of my own future. Then the final entry date, 1 month ago, event the eviction. I hadn't known about it at the time. I found out later from a neighbor. My parents had co-signed Alexis's lease in Chicago. When she stopped paying rent to fund her lifestyle brand, the landlord threatened to sue. My parents, terrified of the financial hit, negotiated a lease break. They agreed to vacate the apartment by February 1st. They didn't tell me. They didn't ask if I had room. They just assumed. They assumed that the good daughter, the smart sister, the one with the steady job and the quiet life, would naturally absorb the disaster. They canceled her lease because they believed my home was already theirs. I closed the laptop. The screen went black, reflecting my own face. I didn't look like a victim. I looked like an actuary who had finally balanced the equation. I had spent 7 years buying my freedom. Tonight, I simply refused to issue a refund. The sun rose over the Continental Divide, painting the snow in shades of violent pink and gold. It was the kind of morning that usually made me pause and breathe, grateful for the isolation. But today, the silence inside the cabin was broken by the angry buzz of my phone against the pine wood table. The digital siege had begun. I didn't pick up the phone to answer. I picked it up to collect data. The first notification was from Instagram. My sister Alexis had posted a reel 3 hours ago. It already had 12,000 views. I tapped the screen. The video opened with a close-up of Alexis's face artfully starred with mascara tears. She was wrapped in a thin motel blanket, shivering for the camera. The caption read, "Abandoned by my own sister in the freezing mountains." I watched it with clinical detachment. We just wanted to see her. Alexis sobbed into the lens. We drove all night to surprise her for the holidays and she locked us out. She called the police on her own parents. We're stranded in a motel with nothing. She didn't mention the moving truck. She didn't mention the 26-foot U-Haul filled with her furniture that was currently parked in the Motel 6 lot. She didn't mention that she had canceled her lease in Chicago without asking me if I had room. In her narrative, she was the little match girl and I was the cruel innkeeper slamming the door. The comments were rolling in like an avalanche. "Your sister is a monster," one user wrote. "Who does that to family?" wrote another. Strangers who knew nothing about my life were diagnosing me as a narcissist, a sociopath, a villain. Then came the text from my parents. They weren't reading the comments. They were coordinating the assault. My mother, Holly, sent a screenshot of a receipt. "We're at the Motel 6 in Silverthorne. The rate is $180 a night. We need 2 rooms. You need to Venmo us $500 immediately to cover this and food. This is your fault, Julia. Fix it." I set the phone down and looked out at the frozen landscape. A younger version of me would have panicked. I would have felt the crushing weight of guilt, the programmed response to my mother's disappointment. I would have thought, maybe I am the monster. Maybe I did overreact. But I wasn't that person anymore. I looked at the situation through the lens of my profession. In risk analysis, you have to understand the root cause of a failure to prevent it from happening again. I realized then that my parents weren't crazy. They weren't evil cartoon villains wringing their hands. It was something far more insidious. They were conditioned. For 30 years, they had operated in a family system where my role was the fixer and Alexis's role was the star. They had normalized a specific kind of cruelty, the cruelty of extraction. To them, my money, my time, and my home were community property. They genuinely believed that my refusal to let them move in wasn't a boundary. It was a theft. In their twisted logic, I was stealing their safety net. They weren't angry because they missed me. They were angry because the appliance they used to fix their problems had stopped working. Understanding this didn't make me forgive them. It made me realize that negotiation was impossible. You cannot reason with a system that views your independence as an act of aggression. I didn't reply to the texts. I didn't comment on the video. I took a screenshot of the video, ensuring the timestamp was visible. I took a screenshot of my mother's demand for money. I saved them to a folder on my cloud drive labeled Evidence. Then I opened my laptop. It was time to stop playing defense. In the world of actuarial science, When a liability becomes too volatile, you don't argue with it. You insure against it. I stopped treating this as a family squabble and started treating it like a hostile corporate takeover. I closed the Instagram tab. I muted the text thread. I sat up straight in my ergonomic chair and engaged the part of my brain reserved for high-stakes audits. I didn't search for a family therapist. I searched for a property attorney licensed in Colorado, specifically one with a reputation for aggressive boundary enforcement. I found a man named Robert whose reviews described him as expensive but lethal. I dialed his number. The consultation fee was $300 an hour. It was the best money I had ever spent. For the next 2 hours, feelings were irrelevant variables. I dealt in facts. I forwarded him the deed to the cabin solely in my name. I forwarded the security footage of the U-Haul blocking my access road. I forwarded the screenshots of my mother's demand for money and Alexis's public defamation. Robert didn't offer sympathy. He offered strategy. By noon, we had drafted a formal cease and desist order. It was a beautiful document heavy with legal jargon and absolute finality. It stated clearly that Holly, Jeffrey, Alexis, and Alexander were permanently barred from entering my property. It outlined that any further attempt to access the premises would be treated as criminal trespassing. It also included a clause regarding the digital harassment, noting that further public defamation would result in a lawsuit for damages. I realized then that no is a complete sentence, but a lawyer's letter on official letterhead is a punctuation mark that cannot be ignored. It transforms a request into a requirement. It strips away the emotional manipulation of "but we're family" and replaces it with the cold hard reality of "you are defendants." Next, I turned my attention to the digital front. I didn't comment on Alexis's video. I didn't engage with the trolls calling me a monster. I used the platform's own tools against them. I flagged the video for harassment and doxing, citing the specific timestamps where she revealed my general location. I contacted the support team for the fundraising page Alexis had hastily set up to help the family survive the winter, flagging it for fraud since they were not in fact stranded without resources, but staying in a motel with a credit card I knew my father had. By 2:00 p.m., the video had been taken down for violating community guidelines. The fundraising page was under review. The digital noise that had been screaming at me all morning was suddenly abruptly silenced. I printed the cease and desist letter. The hum of the printer was the only sound in the room. I signed it with a steady hand. I scanned it and emailed it to my parents and sister. I didn't add a subject line like "I'm sorry" or "please understand." I simply titled it "Notice of Legal Action." I sat back and watched the snow fall outside. I had built a fortress not just of timber and stone, but of paper and law. They wanted a reaction. They wanted tears. Instead, I gave them a firewall. I was no longer their daughter or their sister. I was the plaintiff. Robert called. 3 days later. His voice was grim, stripped of the usual professional distance lawyers maintain. "Julia," he said, "I found something while pulling the property records to register the cease and desist. It's significant." I put the phone on speaker and opened my laptop. "Tell me, your sister, Alexis," he began, "registered an LLC 3 months ago. Mountain Soul Retreats, and the registered business address isn't her apartment in Chicago. It's your cabin address." I felt the blood drain from my face. "What?" "It gets worse," he continued. "I did a search for the business name. She has a website. She's been selling tickets." I typed the name into my browser. The site loaded instantly. A sleek, professionally designed page featuring photos of mountains, yoga poses, and holistic wellness quotes. And there, front and center under the upcoming retreats tab, was my living room. Not a stock photo, a photo taken from the Zillow listing when I bought the house. "Restore your spirit in the Colorado wilds," the copy read. "Join us for an exclusive 7-day immersion at our private sanctuary. Gourmet meals, guided meditation, and luxury accommodations included." "Scroll down to the dates," Robert said. I scrolled. "Winter Solstice Retreat, December 15th to December 22nd. Sold out." December 15th was next Monday. "She sold tickets to a retreat at my house," I whispered, the absurdity of it choking me. "Without asking me. Without even having a lease." "She has a lease," Robert said. "Or rather, she has a document that purports to be a lease. She submitted it to a small business lender to secure a $50,000 startup loan." I pulled the filing. "It has your signature on it, Julia. Or a very bad forgery of it." The world tilted. This wasn't just entitlement anymore. It wasn't just a toxic family dynamic where boundaries were ignored. This was criminal fraud. Alexis had forged my signature on a legal document. She had taken money from a bank under false pretenses. She had taken money from customers, real people who had paid $2,000 each, according to the site, for a service she could not provide. That's why they came, I realized, speaking more to myself than to Robert. That's why the moving truck. They weren't just looking for a place to crash. They were coming to set up. They were going to turn my home into a hotel. "If those clients show up on Monday and there's no retreat," Robert said, "Alexis is looking at multiple counts of fraud, theft by deception, forgery, and if your parents knew about it and helped her move the furniture, which the truck suggests they did, their accessories. I looked at the website again at the photo of my sanctuary stolen and commodified at the smiling picture of Alexis in the About Your Host section describing herself as a visionary healer. This was the kill shot. I didn't need to argue about feelings. I didn't need to explain why I deserved space. I held the nuclear codes. Robert, I said, my voice steady, send everything you found to the local district attorney and send a copy to the bank that issued the loan. Are you sure? Robert asked. Once we do that, there's no going back. Your sister could go to prison. I thought about the years of financial abuse. The $45,000 of debt I paid. The way my parents had canceled her lease assuming I would catch her. The way they had called me a monster for protecting my own home. I am sure, I said. Do it. The family returned 2 days later. The snow was falling in thick, heavy sheets, reducing visibility to a few feet. It was the kind of weather that made the mountains dangerous for anyone unprepared. I saw the headlights first, 2 weak beams cutting through the storm. Then I saw the car, a rented SUV, parked at the locked gate. My phone rang. Unknown number. I ignored it. The intercom buzzed. I ignored it. I walked to the wall panel and turned the monitor on. My mother, Holly, was standing in the snow, pressing the intercom button repeatedly. She wasn't wearing a heavy coat, just a fashionable puffer jacket that was useless against the altitude. Beside her, Alexis was wrapped in a scarf, looking pale and terrified. Julia, please. My mother's voice crackled through the speaker, thin and desperate. We know you're in there. Please answer. I watched them for a moment. They looked small. They looked pathetic. The anger I had expected to feel wasn't there. Instead, I felt a profound sense of distance, as if I were watching strangers on a television screen. I pressed the talk button. What do you want, Julia? My mother sobbed. Thank God. Listen to me. We have to talk. It's an emergency. I sent you a cease and desist, I said, my voice calm. You are trespassing. We know. We know, Holly said quickly. But we didn't have a choice. The clients, the retreat guests, they're arriving tomorrow. Tomorrow? I asked, though I already knew. Yes, 12 of them. They've already flown into Denver. They're renting cars. They'll be here by noon. Alexa stepped forward, her face pressed close to the camera. She looked frantic. Julia, please. I don't have anywhere else to put them. I spent the deposit money. I can't refund them. If I cancel, they'll sue me. I could go to jail. You should have thought of that before you sold tickets to a house you don't own, I said. I made a mistake, Alexis cried. I was just trying to build something. I thought you'd support me. You've always supported me. I supported you, I corrected. I enabled you. There's a difference. Please, Holly begged. Just for 1 week. Just let her host the retreat. We'll clean everything. We'll pay you. We'll pay you from the profits. Just save your sister. Please, Julia. If she goes to jail, it will kill your father. I looked at my father, Jeffrey, sitting in the driver's seat of the SUV, staring straight ahead. He couldn't even look at the camera. He knew what they were asking. He knew it was wrong. But he was here anyway, driving the getaway car for his daughter's fraud. This was the moment. The power flip. For 30 years, they had held the power of approval, of affection, of belonging. They had dangled it in front of me, making me jump through hoops to earn it. Now, the dynamic had inverted. I held their fate in my hands. I could open the gate. I could save them one last time. I could be the hero. And then what? They would learn nothing. They would do it again. And I would be back in the cage. The useful appliance, the safety net that caught them every time they jumped. I am not your insurance policy anymore, I said into the intercom. Julia, don't do this, Alexis screamed. We're family. Family doesn't steal from family. I said family doesn't commit fraud in your name. Family doesn't use you. I picked up a piece of paper from the counter. It was the case number the district attorney's office had given Robert that morning. The case number is 224C92. I read slowly. That is the file number for the fraud investigation the district attorney opened yesterday. I forwarded them the lease you forged, Alexis. I forwarded them the website screenshots. The bank has already frozen the business account. On the screen, Alexis collapsed. Her legs just gave out and she sank into the snow. Holly screamed. Go home, I said. Go back to Chicago, get a lawyer, and never come back here. Julia, my mother wailed. You can't. You're killing us. I reached out and pressed the power button on the intercom. The screen went black. The audio cut out. The silence of the cabin rushed back in absolute and pure. I didn't watch them leave. I walked to the kitchen and made a cup of tea. I stood by the back window, looking out at the forest, not the driveway. I didn't need to see them go. I knew they were gone. The next few weeks were a blur of legalities and logistics, but the chaos stayed firmly on the other side of the Continental Divide. Robert handled the district attorney's office. I handled the silence. I changed my phone number one last time. I deleted my social media accounts. I disconnected the landline. The only way to reach me was through my lawyer or by driving up the mountain. And after the sheriff's warning, I doubted they would try that again. Word eventually trickled back to me through Robert. Alexis was facing felony charges. The plea deal on the table involved probation, restitution, and a permanent criminal record. She and Alexander were being sued by the 12 people who had booked the retreat. My parents had sold their house in the suburbs to help pay for Alexis's legal defense and the restitution. They were downsizing to a 2-bedroom condo. The legacy they had tried to protect by sacrificing me was gone, consumed by the very child they had enabled. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt relief. The heavy, suffocating blanket of obligation that I had worn for 30 years was finally gone. One evening in January, I sat on my deck with a mug of hot cider. The air was crisp and clean, smelling of pine and cold. The snow was falling softly, covering the tracks of the U-Haul, erasing the memory of the invasion. I thought about the family I had lost, or rather the family I had finally admitted I never really had. We are taught that blood is thicker than water, that family is everything that you endure, anything for the people who share your DNA. But that's a dangerous lie. Biology is an accident. Loyalty is a choice. You don't owe your life to the people who gave it to you if they only value you as a resource. Cutting ties wasn't an act of war. It was an act of self-preservation. It was the only way to stop the bleeding. I looked out at the vast white wilderness surrounding my home. It was quiet. It was peaceful, and for the first time in my life, it was mine.